Everybody, and thank you for coming back to see the second week in my installment of videos on how to paint an orange, or so you can just see how I'm going about my series of how I am starting these paintings. Doing my first bit of palette knife to add the detail to the orange. As you kind of noticed from the last video, the orange and the slice are a little bit bigger. That's because as I kept walking by the painting, I thought, that orange is just not big enough for what I want it to be. And that's okay. That happens a lot as artists move about and go back and forth and look at their paintings and think, I like to tweak that a little bit. So that's what I did. I made it a little bit bigger so there'll be a little bit less background, and made the orange slice a lot more comparable to the size of the orange. Today, I'm just going to be working with palette knives to add the detail. Now the key is, I'm using acrylic, which is water-based, and it dries very quickly. I used to use oil paints, but with the little baby running around and not the best ventilated house, and it's winter time, you might be able to hear a little bit of the rain going outside, which we're supposed to get a little snow later, so I'm just kind of waiting for that. It's a little cold for me to open a window to do oil paint. Oil paint dries a lot slower. It's oil-based, obviously, why it's called oil paint. And there's a lot more mediums to work with, to mix in it, that have a lot more of an odor. Even if you get the no odor stuff, there's still going to be one. It's going to be a little toxic for the air, especially if you have a little baby running around like I do, who is napping right now, so we'll try not to be too loud. So since I'm using acrylic, we need to work faster than you would oil, especially with palette knife, even if I'm laying it on thickly. Now I'm just going to start using my paper plate. Got a new one for today, and we're going to be laying in the color. Sorry if it makes kind of a obnoxious noise as I squeeze it out, if it comes out. This time I'm gonna squeeze out a lot more paint. Get a lot more out because you use a lot more. And this is a little kind of clogged, so I will start by using my palette knife to get out the dried up paint that's obviously in there. Get that out and start letting in the wet stuff. Now I'm using palette knives that are meant for painting, but the great thing about artists is that you aren't just bound to shop at a arts and crafts store or an art supply store. You have a lot of options to go to hardware stores, which I actually really enjoy to go to them because they have cheaper supplies and a lot more to work from, and options for tools. You can use spatulas that you use to spackle walls or whatever you might use it for. And white is your best friend when it comes to colors. You use it the most, and you usually run out of it the fastest, and sometimes all you need is a small tube of black to last you for a long time. Okay, now I'm going to add a little bit green to my palette. You need to start by having a prepared palette. I did not. Obviously, I was too busy trying to set up the camera at a new angle to see if I can get this better. Okay, so let's get started. What you're going to want to do is lay down a thick layer of paint to kind of work with. At least that's how I like to do it. I like to work with wet paint because I can blend a little bit better than with dry paint. So we're going to start with just the base orange and mix it in. Like I said last week, you just need a little bit of the darker pigment into the lighter pigment because it will definitely dominate. So I put a little bit of the red in my big blob of yellow, and look at how much there is. And if you like to save your paint, if you don't think you're going to use it all, use jars or any kind of plastic container works. My husband loves to keep all the glass jars from any food that we buy that comes in a glass jar. Today my water jar is one of the baby food jars that we use. It's a little bit bigger, and I didn't need that much water with the palette knife. And so I got the orange. I'm going to start laying it on thickly. Now I'm just going to be doing the big orange today. I'm not going to do the slice just yet. That'll be in the next video. So you need to get it on there thick and get started on it. It doesn't have to be perfect because you're going to be going back in it with other colors. Now last week I kind of told you a little bit about complementary colors, and if you read my blog, you have read a little bit more detail about that and what complementary colors are in their pairing. So as I said, orange's complementary color is blue. And if you look at the color wheel I posted on the blog, you will see that complementary colors are the color that's opposite of the one on the color wheel. So the opposite color for orange on the color wheel is blue. And if you think about it, it's the one color out of the three primaries that doesn't make orange. So that kind of can help you too. Just think, okay, red and yellow are the two colors that make orange. So obviously, blue being the one that was left out is the complementary color. And same with violet and yellow, is its complementary color. So once you're making violet, you use blue and red. So of course the color that wasn't used was yellow, and the same goes with red and green are complementary colors, which to me are the easiest to remember because I always think of Christmas. And that would be, if you make green, you use yellow and blue, and the color that was left out of that, it was red. So okay, I'm not getting too close to the edge because I know that I will be going in a little bit more later. Okay, so I got kind of a pretty thick layer of orange there, and we'll start working from that. Now I'm not going to make this too realistic, but I want you to understand that's an orange. So I'm not going to do a still life, which a still life is you paint from objects you're observing right then, and it's staying still life. So say I wanted to do a bowl of fruit or a vase of flowers, and I wanted to paint from life, I would have a nice setup and have the lighting how I'd want it and have it on a table, and that wouldn't be touched and nothing would disturb it, which is really kind of impossible in a house with a child running around that everything's getting messed with and being touched, and he's crawling and he's pulling up and he's trying to start to walk, so things are just a mess right now. So obviously I'm not going to use a still life, but I did grab an orange, and I'm going to kind of just use it for observation to see how light's hitting it since it's a round surface. And I do want to add the top where the stem was. And so I'm just going to set it over here. I would maybe kind of lean it up because I'm going to have this orange at an angle, and just kind of get a general idea of how I want the light to hit it. Okay. So obviously I'm going to start, what I'm going to try doing is I'm going to start with where the light's hitting it. So I'm going to get my yellow, add a little bit more because I used it all for the orange, and then I'm going to use white. My biggest flaw is that I never use enough white to show highlights, and it usually shows later, and there's not enough contrast in the painting. I'm going to have the light kind of hit around here. And the great thing about palette knife, you can just be messy and and just have a little fun with it. And it's already kind of starting to make a little bit of a yellow, and I'll go back into that and add some more white to add more contrast. That's something my husband always says, is you should add more contrast to that painting and it'll really stand out. And he's right. Even though he has a degree in forestry and he works in GIS and mapping stuff and has no real knowledge of art, he's still a viewer, and his opinion matters, and I always ask it. So I always ask people their opinions on your work, and they can help you out. So here I finished adding the white, which ended up looking more yellow as I applied it to the wet orange paint. I'm going to start adding the yellow. Now, when you're doing your values, you kind of have to think about the value of the paint in the sense of how it looks light and dark. The best way to kind of learn that is if you paint or color a page with all the colors of the rainbow, and then you even use your camera on black and white mode, and you can see what colors look more black or darker gray, and that's kind of how you can get the value of it, the hue of that. Now I'll go into more detail in my blog about what value is, but value here is the change in lightness and darkness in a color or in a hue, which is another name for color. So we're going to kind of go adding that yellow on there and see. I usually end up using most of my paint, so I don't usually store it in a jar because I end up using it because I lay it on so thickly. So get more of that orange back in there, and so I'm starting this, you see, it goes from light, and I'm going to start going to dark, and that's when I'll start adding a little of the red. Now don't forget, we're going to go back in with a complementary color, which is blue, and we are going to use that as kind of our shading element. And don't be afraid to use different colors. You don't have to stick to just oranges and yellows and reds and even blue. You can go in there and have some fun and add some more different colors and add some drama to your paintings and add some visual interest and really kind of make a statement. Now, see, I'm laying it on thick, and I'm hoping I don't drop any of it on my floor, which I did not put a cover down on it, so if I do get anything in there, then I will be getting the stain remover out and scrubbing for a while. See the kind of contrast I'm creating here. And then now, just keep working the paint. Don't stop and keep moving, and especially since it's acrylic, it's going to dry fast on us, so we need to work kind of quickly. Even though I'm laying it on thick, it will kind of get that paint skin on top. Underneath might be still a little wet, but the top will have that firm surface, you know, like Jello, not Jello, pudding gets on top, that skin. You have to break through with your spoon once you're eating some chocolate pudding, and you need to do that with paint, and it can add that skin, and you have to kind of dig it off, and you have this long skin, and it's gross. Well, anyways, let's start adding the stem, and I'm just going to go straight with green, and I'm going to kind of put it off to the side here. I don't want it to be directly on top. I want the orange to look like it's leaning a little bit, which the orange usually is kind of sitting on its side since it's round. So I'm going to get that green in there. And then you notice most of nothing is just one solid color. Everything has multiple colors in it, whether it's just different values of one color or just different colors because the light hits it. So I'm going to add a little yellow there to show the difference in the stem. And then of course a little white for some highlight. You can never forget about that white. and that's what will help with the contrast. Now we're going to kind of leave that like it is, and I'll work back into it once I start changing things up. Let's finish adding some orange up here. And if you're using canvas, it has more give to it. So when you apply paint, it'll bounce. The surface will bounce back a little for you. So it's not as hard using a palette knife. But I warn you, palette knives get sharp after a while. You keep using it, you keep wiping it, and it starts to sharpen the edges. And there are times that it can puncture right through your canvas, which is just a pain in the butt because you'll have it all. If you're making your own canvas, it just becomes a big pain because you lost all that work you did because you cut a hole in it. You have to start all over, and that's just not good. Okay, so I'm starting to, I added some more orange in there to get some paint to work with. I'm going back in with the yellow. Now you can see, it looks kind of a little bit like a mess right now. Well, that's why I started adding that thick paint down so I have it to work with. And see, I'm constantly adding more paint because you use so much more than you realize that you use. And that's why I use an old shirt. I just dropped my palette and got it all over my shirt. Luckily, this is an old shirt. I got one of those bag shirts you get at Walmart, and I just have plenty more to work with for that. Okay, so now I'm looking at my orange again and seeing where that light is. The light's not just in the center. I'm going to make a little bit more light. It kind of stays around this area, obviously in the orange. So I'll work it in. A little bit more yellow in there. And things start to get a little muddled once you have that much thick paint going on your canvas, so you gotta sometimes lay it on thicker or wait till it dries and go back into it. And that's completely your preference if you like to work with drier paints. Okay, bring back that white. Get that contrast. I'm going to start losing that contrast, and my husband's going to say something to me about it. Where's that contrast, Brenda? You're always so bad about forgetting to add it. So, and with the stem, there's gonna be divots. So what I need to go back in is add that shadow for those divots. And that's, I'm gonna start with the red, and then, like I said, I'm gonna go back in with that blue to show the shadows like I'd like. My dog Abby is coming to join me. You can hop up here, Abby. Come on. We can see her. No, she's just going to stay at my feet. Yeah, she's a little camera shy today. Okay, now it's time to start adding that blue. And I'm going to be using that on the edges and using it sparingly because once you start mixing that blue with the red, it's going to start being that violet. Knowing that color knowledge will help you kind of understand that stuff once you're working with wet paint. And don't forget there's yellow in there, and it's going to be a little green too. See how already that contrast is really popping it out. And now don't forget, I have an object in front of the orange. So there's going to be a shadow cast on it. And to help show a three-dimensional image, you're going to need to show how it's in front by using shadows and highlights and things like that. So I'm going to be going in with the blue and showing that shadow. And don't worry if you get into your blocking and shape there. It's totally fine. Just like you're going to be going back into it later. See, that little bit of blue is really adding the contrast. So I'm going to add for the divot up here for where that stem is, so you can kind of get a wedge here. Starting to look like the sun, isn't it? Well, that makes it feel bright on such a gloomy day we have here in Kansas. Okay. So I'm going to add a little bit more. Don't be shy. Great thing, like I said about paint in the first video, is you can always paint over it. And it's a little harder once you are using paint so thickly like I am, but that's fine. Kind of a lot of the reason why I paint like this is my freshman year, I think it was my freshman year of college, I took an intro painting class, and I bought all these oil paints, and I made all these canvases, and I painted, and my paints were so thin because I was afraid to use too much of this such expensive paint. I was a college student, so I was trying to stretch my dollars. So I made the paint so thin on the canvas, and my professor, and I wasn't the only one, ringed us all and said, you gotta use that paint thicker. Even if you're not using it textured like this, you need to add the layers, and don't be afraid to use the thickness of the paint. So then I kept doing it. I mean, all semester long, I was just kept painting so thinly because I was so afraid to waste that paint. And then I just said, forget it. I pulled out my palette knife and I just laid it on super thick. And boy, did that make a difference. And so I did that on purpose to not be afraid to use a lot of paint. And it really helped me out, and it made me realize how much I really enjoy painting thickly like all the Impressionists did with such thick paint. It is just so beautiful. And if you read other parts of my blog when I talk about Vincent van Gogh and how I saw one of his Cypress paintings and how thick that paint was, that he painted on a windy day in the mental asylum that he was in, mental institute, and when they researched that painting and they took little samples of it, they found bits of bugs and insects in the painting because it was so windy. It got stuck in that thick paint, and I just love that idea that the paint was so thick, and you kind of get a good idea of what that day was like as he was outside in plein air painting outdoors, and how much closer you can get to understanding what that day was like for him. Okay, see, I added the blue, made that orange pop a lot. Well, I kind of want to go back in and blend it a little bit, so that's why I had that red kind of already put down, and I'm going to kind of get a little messy there. Now, as you notice, I'm using a paper towel again, and I'm wiping my palette knife because I don't want it to get too muddy, and so I'm kind of blending it. I don't want to be too blendy. Some people like to show that smooth transition between colors, and when you're using a palette knife, it's kind of harder to do that. With a brush, you can accomplish it so much easier. And so I'm going to kind of blend it in so it goes smoother into the orange. Great thing with palette knife is you can really be in control of the kind of strokes you want to create in that texture that you're making. Right now I'm just kind of doing whatever smooth, just laying it on thick, and there's been times that I like to keep real small strokes and show a little bit different kind of texture. There we go. And go back in the top here with that divot where the stem I put in is. I'm mixing it up there. You do want it to be not too harsh in the contrast. A little bit extra there. Help blend those colors. Okay. I'm going to go back in and keep adding those layers and keeping moving and adding more orange and getting that extra texture there and blending. And that's why it's great when the paint's still wet, because you can just kind of move it around a little bit, and that's always really nice. One of my friends in college was reading a book, and I forget what the name of the book is, and I might just ask him what it is, and he contacted me because it was about artists and asked me to kind of explain this quote that he was trying to write a paper about. And so I read it, and it was about the differences in people and the points in their lives, and how they approached art. The young children in this quote would paint, and they would stop. They would do their paintings, and they would stop at a certain point. And he just said these kids are like Picassos. I mean, they're just amazing at knowing when to stop. And then the older people who would paint would overwork their paintings, and they went past the point of where it was perfect, where that painting was done, but they kept adding because they made it complicated. And if you've ever watched Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader, there's a reason why adults are not always smarter than fifth graders, because we overcomplicate things. We look at a word problem or an equation and think, knowing all the stuff that we do and all the possible ways we can come to a solution, we overcomplicate it and we get the wrong answer. A kid with their simple mind, their innocent mind, can see the direct answer and get it. And so that's why kids sometimes paintings are so beautiful, because they know when to stop. They don't want to overcomplicate it. And there was a woman in my painting class who she did a lot of close-ups of flowers, and if you know who Georgia O'Keeffe is, she did that a lot. You might want to look her up. Just be careful. Some of her paintings are a little controversial, but she would start her paintings and block it out using very thinned out acrylic. Kind of like, almost looked like watercolor. It was just beautiful. The layers upon layers of watercolor and washing out she did to get her painting was just beautiful. And I remember telling her, I said, I will buy that painting from you right now as it is. It's just beautiful. You can see the layers of the paint and the different textures she was creating with just thin paint, which is very possible. You don't have to use a palette knife every time. And she always would go back in with thick globs of paint using her her palette knives, and just ruining that painting. She'd overcomplicate it, and it just became this thick, one-note, flat mess. And no offense to her, but she was a very good artist if she knew when to stop. And I feel like that's what my professor's goal was most of the time in our class, was just telling us to stop. It's done. Don't touch it anymore. So that happens a lot with painting, and hopefully you kind of learn when to stop. And that's why advice from other people is so great. And sometimes you really need to ask their advice. Even if it's someone who doesn't have a lot of knowledge of art, they are still looking at it, and they still have an opinion, and you need to ask it. You can ask their opinion. Doesn't mean you have to always take what their advice is, but hey, at least you're getting different opinions on things. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit more white in there. I think I'm going to stop for today. And I'm going to kind of sit on this and walk past it like I did before, and kind of decide if I want to add more or take away, and kind of get a general plan going for the next video I do. And either we're going to go back into this in my next video, or we're going to start on the orange slice and then kind of work from there. But this is what I've gotten so far. I'm going to step back, look at it, and sometimes the best thing you can do is to leave. Just walk away, go do something else, watch a show on TV, go to the store, do some other project you're doing around the house, eat dinner, and then come back and look at it again with fresh eyes, and you'll see what you want to do to change it or to tweak it. And I might do that right now. I've been looking at it for a while now, and I can only see what I've got going. And I know I need to change something. I want to do something more to it, but I can't figure out what. So I just need to go away now and figure that out. So tune in next week, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll get reminders that new videos have been posted. Please don't forget to read my blog. I will post the link to the video in my blog every week on Tuesday. I don't know why I chose Tuesday. It just seems to work out the best for my house. And hopefully you can follow me on Twitter. I just posted a really great article about the history of paint and kind of where it was before and how we used to make it and how toxic it was and how it could have been responsible for killing a few people because how toxic the chemicals and the ingredients were in paint, or how gross it kind of was. So feel free to read that link on my Twitter at BrendaDailyArt. You can follow me on my blog at brendadailyart.blogspot.com. All these links will be in the description below. And just keep posted and keep following me, and hopefully I'm teaching you something and you're getting some advice and you're learning something and being the best artist you can be, and create as much as you can and have fun. Thank you for watching, and see you next week. Thank you.